In a small town somewhere in the heart of America, Sarah stood waiting for the bus, her breath visible in the chilly morning air. The street was quiet, save for the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant sound of a dog barking. She had just finished a long shift at the diner and was ready to get home. As she scrolled through her phone, lost in thought, the peace of the moment shattered like glass. A loud voice called out from behind her, "Hey, girl." Turning, Sarah faced a man who seemed larger than life, his wild eyes and boisterous laughter interrupting her solitude. At first, she tried to brush him off, just a rude guy on the street, yet as she turned back to her phone, she felt a rough grip on her arm. He bellowed, his breath smelling of cheap beer and something sour. Panic surged through her, a wave of fear crashing over her like ice-cold water. Her heart raced, and suddenly, the world around her felt too big, too threatening. But the more she pulled away, the tighter his grip got. His laughter echoed off the buildings, sounding almost like a taunt. In that moment, she couldn't help but think about all the times she had heard stories about girls who found themselves in worse situations, stories that ended badly. It's a sick truth. Many people stand by and do nothing when they see someone in trouble. Fear paralyzes them. It was then, as Sarah struggled against him, that she noticed a figure standing quietly across the street. A cowboy, tall and lean, with a weathered hat low over his eyes, leaned against a lamppost. He was silent, almost like he was waiting for something to happen. Sarah's heart sank. Would he be like the others? Would he just watch as her fear grew? Time seemed to stretch infinitely. The loud man was still gripping her arm, his face twisted in a mixture of amusement and aggression. But the cowboy didn't move. He did not shift his weight or take off his hat. He simply observed. Then it happened. The loud man, lost in his bravado, tugged at Sarah roughly, and a sharp gasp escaped her lips. He sneered, leaning closer, invading her space. Her pulse raced, each beat echoing in her ears. She wanted to scream, to cry for help, but all she could manage was a terrified silence. And then, like a lightning bolt out of the clear sky, the cowboy moved. He pushed off the lamppost with a calm confidence that filled the air. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Hey," he said, his voice low but firm. It was steady, commanding, and somehow soothing all at once. The loud man turned, surprised. He shouted, but there was a tremor of uncertainty now. The cowboy didn't waver. He stood tall, his hands resting lightly on his belt, eyes locked on the loud man. Yeah, Sarah felt a rush of hope. The cowboy's presence was a clear contrast to the chaos swirling around her. It was like light breaking through a cloud. She saw the loud man's bravado beginning to crumble. The tension in the air shifted, and for the first time since this had begun, she felt a little less afraid. The cowboy continued, his tone unwavering. It was as if he had summoned the courage of 100 men with those simple words. The loud man, now cornered by the calmness of the stranger, shifted his weight nervously. "Back off, I don't need you sticking your nose in," he stammered, but the bravado didn't quite reach his eyes any longer. The cowboy took a step closer, still unbothered. "You need to walk away." It is said that fear and bravery often walk hand in hand, and in that moment, Sarah saw the bravery standing before her. The cowboy was completely silent, yet his presence roared louder than the loud man ever could. He embodied strength without display, unlike the man who had been grasping her arm like an object. As the tension built, the loud man's facade started to crack. He eyed the cowboy, calculating his next move, measuring the risk of getting physical. Sarah could see the internal struggle on his face. He started, but couldn't finish. The cowboy merely raised an eyebrow, waiting. Moments felt like hours, but then the loud man let go of Sarah's arm, releasing her like a child dropping their favorite toy. Stumbling back, she finally felt her own strength return as she stepped away from him, glancing back at the cowboy. A spark of gratitude lit her eyes, and for a fleeting moment their gazes locked, entirely understood. The loud man, sensing defeat, turned on his heel and walked away, muttering threats under his breath. As his figure disappeared into the distance, the quiet that had once been disturbed slowly returned. Sarah stood there breathless, her heart racing, but no longer from fear this time, it was from relief. The cowboy didn't move right away. He just stood there, taking a moment to assess the situation. The tension that had wrapped around them slowly unraveled. Finally, he approached her, his demeanor still calm. He asked, his voice softer now, almost gentle. Sarah blinked, her heart still trying to recoup. I think so," she stammered, still shaking a bit. He tipped his hat slightly as a sign of acknowledgement. There was a weight in those words, they felt heavy with experience. In his silence, he had conveyed more than words often could. She asked, a mix of curiosity and gratitude in her tone. The cowboy smiled a little, his eyes warming. "I wanted to see if someone would do something, saw your struggle." Sarah nodded, feeling a swell of appreciation. The world can feel so big and cold sometimes, but in that moment she recognized a bond between them, a shared understanding of kindness and courage. "I stand at the diner and see so many people just ignoring things," she said, her expression growing serious. "Most people don't," he replied, a shadow crossing his face. He paused, glancing in the direction where the loud man had fled. "But sometimes you just have to take a stand." As they both stood on that empty street, a sense of camaraderie blossomed between them. There was something comforting in their shared silence. Sarah felt as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. For the first time that day, she could breathe freely again. He asked, tilting his head, shifting the conversation lightly. "Not really," Sarah admitted after a moment. "Maybe you should." There was a twinkle in his eyes, a hint of adventure. Sarah smiled, imagining roads winding through open fields, sunsets over mesas she had yet to see. Maybe his silence was his strength, a reminder that words aren't always necessary. She asked, half joking but also curious. "Absolutely," he said firmly. At that moment, Sarah felt something shift within her. The loud man was only a distant memory, a bitter stain on her day, but the cowboy brought warmth. His words lingered. She realized she held more strength than she had ever given herself credit for. With a sincere smile, she said, "Thank you." Their eyes met again, and for a fleeting moment, the chaos seemed to whirl away. Each of them had faced their own battles, but in that simple exchange, they had both won. The bus arrived slowly, its engine rumbling like a grumpy old giant. Sarah looked back at the cowboy, feeling a strange mix of hope and determination. "Take care out there," she said, and for the first time today, she felt truly free. "You too," he replied, tipping his hat again. As the door of the bus folded open, Sarah stepped in, her heart still racing but now filled with possibility. The cowboy stood back, watching as she took a seat by the window. She glanced back one last time. A smile crossed her face, and for the first time all day, everything felt right. That moment was more than an encounter. It was a reminder that even in darkness, light can break through. A loud man may have grabbed her arm, but a silent cowboy had shown her the power of kindness, and in that moment, she could finally breathe again. She didn't expect to have her arm seized so tightly that her heart practically stopped. The moment jolted her, a violent interruption to a peaceful afternoon she thought would be uneventful. It began like any other day, a warm, sunny afternoon in a quiet town where everyone knew each other, but not everything is as calm as it seems. Sarah was walking home from her job at the diner, thinking about the tips she'd earned and the customers who smiled at her through the busy hours. She took her usual route, a charming street lined with blooming trees. The soft rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze was comforting, wrapping around her like a warm embrace. But as she turned the corner, the sunlight faded into shadows cast by an old apartment building. She heard laughter, a loud, boisterous laughter that sliced through the calm. As she rounded the corner, that's when she saw him. And standing in a small group, his hands flailed wildly as he entertained his friends. The laughter of his crew was infectious, but something about that man sent a shiver down her spine. His energy was manic, and it grew wilder with every laugh, making his presence feel larger and more overwhelming. Her instincts kicked in the way they always do when something feels off. She tried to ignore him, quickening her pace, thinking she'd simply walk by. But he saw her, those wild eyes locked onto her. "Hey girl," his voice was like a blast of air, sharp and demanding. Sarah's stomach dropped. She chose not to respond, hoping he would lose interest. "Just keep walking," she told herself. But the loud man broke from his friends and closed the distance between them. He was taller than she expected, built like a bulldog, and his laughter faded, replaced by a glower that made her skin crawl. He pressed, stepping into her path, a wall she couldn't climb over. She attempted to sidestep him, her heart pounding like a drum, but before she could escape, he reached out, grabbing her arm firmly. "Hey," she exclaimed, panic surging through her. His grip was like a vice, and for a moment all the warmth of the day poured out of her. The world around them faded into a blur, his friends still laughing, the cars passing by, the soft whispers of wind. Nothing mattered except the pinching hold on her arm and his unfriendly smile, filled with bravado that made her shiver. He yelled, his voice loud enough to turn heads, drawing the attention of passers-by. But no one stepped closer, they just watched apprehensively. Fear grips people, makes them hesitant. They know they should help, but they often don't. In that moment of chaos, Sarah's eyes darted around, desperate for anyone to come to her rescue, but the world remained frustratingly still. Then just across the street, she noticed a figure. A cowboy leaned against a lamppost, his posture relaxed, his hat pulled low over his eyes. He didn't laugh, he didn't yell, he simply watched like he was waiting for something to happen. Time slowed and her heart raced. She could feel the loud man's breath on her face, filled with the scent of alcohol and arrogance. Desperation clawed at her. She cried, tugging at her arm, but his grip only tightened. Something in the cowboy's demeanor was different. It wasn't just his silence, he held a steady confidence that cut through her panic. She couldn't read him. Was he going to walk away too? Fear gripped her heart even tighter, but then, as if sensing her despair, he pushed off the lamppost and walked over. "Hey," he said, his voice calm and steady, contrasting the chaos. The loud man turned, startled. He bristled, but there was a tension in his voice that hinted at uncertainty. "I think you need to let her go," the cowboy replied, keeping his distance, his hands relaxed at his sides. The loud man laughed, but it was a nervous chuckle. "A man who's not afraid to stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves," the cowboy answered, his tone unwavering. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. Would the cowboy's calmness be enough? The loud man's bravado faltered for a moment, and she felt a flicker of hope. The loud man scoffed, but there were beads of sweat forming on his brow, as if he could sense his power slipping away. The cowboy stepped forward ever so slightly, his eyes unwavering. "You know you've crossed a line." In that moment, a wave of courage washed over Sarah. She pulled against the loud man's grip again. "Please, just let me go," she pleaded, her voice steadier now. The loud man hesitated, uncertainty flashing across his face, and the shift was palpable. "You don't want to regret this," he retorted, shifting uncomfortably. The bravado was cracking, and Sarah saw the cracks forming in his facade. The cowboy echoed, his voice low. It was a simple statement, but it hung in the air like a challenge. In that brief moment, Sarah felt the tension shift entirely, like the air before a storm breaks. She looked into the cowboy's eyes. They reflected strength and unwavering support. He was willing to face the loud man head-on. The loud man realized he was cornered and released her arms, stepping back as if the ground beneath him began to crumble. The grip that had held her captive was gone. A gasp of relief escaped her, combined with disbelief that someone had actually stood up for her. She took a shaky step back, regaining her balance. "Don't you dare touch her again," the cowboy warned, his voice a low rumble now that had no room for doubt. Silence enveloped them as the loud man weighed his options. He took one last glare at Sarah before spinning on his heel, fury boiling but knowing he had lost this battle. He stormed away, muttering angry words, his bravado evaporating into the distance. A heavy weight fell off Sarah's shoulders. She turned to the cowboy, who stood there, calm and steady, rooted in place like a tree sheltering her from the storm. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. He tipped his hat slightly, a modest gesture laced with sincerity. As adrenaline faded, Sarah felt shaken but safe, the warmth of gratitude washing over her. "I was so scared. I didn't know what would happen if you hadn't come," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Did great," he assured her, a gentle strength in his words. His eyes were like open windows, revealing a world of understanding. People often don't act because they fear making things worse, but sometimes silence is not enough. "I know," she said, recalling how often she'd seen others in trouble and felt too afraid to step in herself. Life can feel so big and cold, and often it's easy to ignore what's happening just a few feet away. But that simple act of standing up can change everything. There's power in solidarity, something she felt in that moment. Sarah asked, her curiosity breaking through her lingering fear. He stepped back slightly, a hint of a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. There was a quiet strength radiating from him. They shared a smile, a moment of understanding passing between them. Here was someone who recognized the struggle, someone who chose to fight against injustice when he could have stayed silent. "I'm Sarah," she said, extending her hand in a friendly gesture. "Nice to meet you, Sarah. I'm Jake," he replied, shaking her hand firmly but with gentleness, as if he understood the world could be harsh and yet so beautiful. She asked, feeling the sun warm her skin again, washing away the earlier chill. "Yeah, got a long road ahead of me," he said, glancing down the street almost wistfully. He looked so at ease, so connected to the world around him. Sarah couldn't help but admire that. "Wish I could do that," she said, her gaze dropping to the ground. "You're not stuck unless you want to be," he remarked quietly. The way he said it made her question everything he had implied. Stuck, the word echoed in her mind. Maybe it was time to make a change. "I've just been working at the diner," she confessed, looking up at him. "You can," he replied, a glimmer of encouragement in his eyes. In that moment, an idea sparked inside her. Maybe it was time to step out of her comfort zone. Maybe it was time to be bold, to be like Jake and take those first steps towards something greater. She hesitated, then spoke with courage she didn't know she had. "Do you think I could travel?" "Absolutely," Jake replied, his voice unwavering. "The world is waiting for you. Every journey begins with a single step." His words stayed with her, swirling in her mind, planting seeds of ambition. With each moment they talked, she could feel a change brewing, a transformation brought on by the harrowing event of just moments ago. She ventured, suddenly hopeful that perhaps he could inspire her in more ways than one. "Of course," he replied. She asked, genuinely curious. Jake took a moment, looking thoughtful. Sarah nodded, seeing the irony of them having that very conversation moments after he'd intervened. "I've been on the receiving end of fear, just like you." "It changes you," he answered, his gaze growing distant as if lost in thought. "You understand that silence can be dangerous." Their conversation drifted, a shared exploration of dreams, fears, and the pursuit of courage. Each moment brought them closer, building a bond forged through shared experiences. Eventually, Sarah noticed the sun was starting its descent, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Time seemed to fly, and she reluctantly realized her journey was nearing an end. The call of home echoed in her mind, mixed with a newfound sense of purpose. "I should let you get back on the road," she said, her heart oddly heavy. "Don't rush," he replied serenely. "Take your time." A warm smile tugged at her lips. His calmness had wrapped around her like a protective blanket against the chaos. Jake chuckled softly. "Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up. Remember, you can be that person too, for yourself or for someone else." As they exchanged a final glance, Sarah felt gratitude swell within her. The encounter would remain etched in her memory, an unforgettable moment that had sparked both courage and kinship. In a world filled with noise, they had found a connection, even amidst the chaos. "I'll remember that," Sarah said, her voice steady, leaving no room for doubt. Jake replied, tipping his hat one last time. As he stepped back, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their paths would cross again someday. With one last look at the cowboy, she turned and made her way down the street, her heart lighter than it had been just hours before. The weight of fear had lifted, and in its place, something new and vibrant had taken root, a seed planted by a silent cowboy who had dared to break the silence. In a world overshadowed by chaos, she felt a spark of hope, knowing that she could be part of the change. The journey was just beginning, and she was ready to walk into that sunset of possibilities, arm outstretched, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The air crackled with tension as Sarah walked down the busy street, her mind lost in the rhythm of her thoughts. She had just finished a long shift at the diner where she worked tirelessly to make ends meet. The sun hung high in the sky, casting warm beams of light on the bustling crowd, but the moment felt heavy. She could feel the weight of her exhaustion behind her eyes, enough to blur the edges of her reality. Then, out of nowhere, chaos erupted. A loud voice broke through the midday chatter, echoing across the sidewalk. "Hey," it was a crude call, sharp enough to pierce the protective bubble she often wrapped around herself. Sarah turned her head, her heart racing. A man brash and overconfident had stepped into her path, his friends laughing behind him like a pack of wolves. Just passing by, she mumbled, trying to sidestep him. But he was quicker, blocking her way and grabbing her arm firmly. His grip was rough, and a jolt of fear shot through her, the kind that makes your pulse thump loud in your ears. This wasn't just an innocent flirtation, it felt predatory. "Oh, come on," he laughed, leaning in closer, invading her personal space as her stomach twisted. She could feel a crowd forming around them, people stopping to watch, eyes flickering its way, but not a single soul intervening. It was in moments like these that silence crashed down heavier than 1,000 words. Sarah shouted, her voice shaky but defiant. She yanked her arm, trying to break free, but his grip only tightened, sending a pulse of panic coursing through her veins. Anyone who has felt threatened knows the icy fingers of fear. They creep in and twist your gut like a vice. Just then, she noticed a figure across the street, a cowboy, standing tall and composed, watching the scene unfold with a quiet intensity. He leaned against a lamppost, arms crossed over his chest, his cowboy hat casting a shadow over his eyes. While the world around her was loud and chaotic, he remained like a mountain, solid and immovable. For a fleeting moment, a glimmer of hope flickered inside her. Would he step in? The loud man barked, still gripping her arm. The cowboy unfolded himself from the lamppost and strolled over, calm and calculated, like he was striding through a small, familiar town rather than a scene erupting with tension. That relief she felt morphed into anticipation. "Let her go," the cowboy said, his voice low but strong, cutting through the air like a knife. The loud man turned, surprise and anger flashing across his face. "I might just have a problem with a man who thinks he can grab a woman like that," the cowboy replied, unflinching. There was an undeniable strength in his voice, resonating with the kind of authority that commands respect without needing to shout. Sarah could feel the grip on her arm loosening. The loud man faltered, the bravado for a moment fading into uncertainty. "I'm not afraid of you," he snarled, but it felt more like a challenge thrown into the wind, lacking conviction. As the cowboy stepped forward, it was as though the world around them had shrunk. They became the center of attention, two men standing across a battlefield of words. The crowd, once spectators watching a show, were now witnesses, holding their breath as they observed the unfolding drama. "Why don't you prove it?" the cowboy replied, voice steady and unwavering. He didn't raise it, he didn't have to. The power of presence spoke for itself. Sarah felt a surge of admiration for this stranger willing to take a stand, the tension around her loosening as she saw the loud man hesitate again, glancing back at his friends who were now equally unsure. In that moment, Sarah realized something profound. So often we feel abandoned in our battles. The silence of bystanders can feel like a weight that crushes the spirit. Yet here was a man whose silence wasn't passive. It was strong, grounded. It was a challenge to do better, to be better. The cowboy continued, voice calm, eyes unwavering. The loud man shifted uncomfortably, surveying the scene as though he realized for the first time that he wasn't just an entertainer, but a spectacle. With one last glare at Sarah, he let go of her arm, almost relinquishing his hold on any sense of pride he thought he had. He turned and walked away, a fallen king retreating into the shadows. Sarah stood there, breathless, half in disbelief and half in gratitude. That moment, so raw and powerful, felt like a scene ripped out of a movie. The adrenaline had her heart racing, but underneath that pulse of fear resided a new feeling, relief. "Thank you," she breathed, turning to the cowboy whose presence had pulled her back from the brink, but he shrugged it off, an easy smile breaking across his face. "I couldn't just stand there." His eyes sparkled with a quiet wisdom, and Sarah found herself wanting to know more about this man who had entered her life at the most unexpected moment. She asked, curiosity bubbling up. He tilted his head slightly, thoughtfully. "I was waiting to see if someone would help you. A lot of people would just walk on by." It was a simple statement, but it settled deep within her. For so long, she had felt trapped in a routine, questioning whether her voice mattered. Maybe it didn't have to be a physical battle every time. Maybe standing up for someone for something could also mean not letting injustice slip by unnoticed. "So you were just," she asked, pushing her hair back nervously. "Yeah, you could say that," he replied, humor dancing in his eyes. "Sometimes silence is stronger than shouting." Pondering his words, Sarah found herself reflecting on her own life, on countless missed opportunities where she could have spoken up or acted out but had stayed silent. The world can feel too massive and overwhelming, but here was a man, a stranger no less, who had stepped in when it mattered. That kind of courage ignited something within her, an ember of awareness that refused to remain hidden. She asked, feeling eager to learn more about him. "Jake," he said, tipping his hat slightly in a polite gesture. "Yeah, that's me," she replied, her smile widening. "A position isn't a definition," he said, his tone encouraging. Her heart swelled. Here was a stranger who was not only wise but gentle. Their conversation unfolded like the petals of a flower, revealing deeper layers of understanding. She asked, curiosity guiding her. He chuckled, the sound rich and warm. "Just a cowboy," she repeated, challenged by the humility in his words. "I appreciate that, but I like keeping it simple," he replied, glancing up as a breeze danced through the air. Her thoughts drifted back to the moments before he had stepped in, the uncertainty that had wrapped around her like a heavy fog. "You really saved me there," he tilted his head in acknowledgement. "You had the strength to push back too." Their conversation continued to flow as easily as water, each exchange deepening their connection. Sarah felt her fears fade away like echoes in the wind. It struck her how rare it was to meet someone like Jake, a quiet force, embodying strength and reassurance. But as they spoke, shadows lengthened, and Sarah realized the sun was beginning to dip low on the horizon. A mixture of warmth and coolness wrapped around them. Time felt suspended, but reality had its way of creeping back in. "I should probably get going," she said reluctantly, eyeing the street. He nodded, understanding. "Of course, but remember, you've got a voice. Use it whenever it matters." She nodded, both grateful and inspired. "Thank you, Jake." As they exchanged one last glance, their eyes locking in a moment that carried the weight of shared courage, Sarah felt a shift within herself. The experience with the loud man had almost shattered her spirit, but here with Jake she felt renewed, emboldened to face the chaos of life head-on. "Take care out there, Sarah," he said, tipping his hat again as she took a step back. "And you too, Jake," she replied, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and newfound purpose. As she walked away, there was a spring in her step. The street seemed brighter, the sun setting in hues of gold and crimson painting the sky. She couldn't shake the feeling of possibilities opening before her like the morning fog lifting. That chance encounter had ignited something within her, an awareness of her own strength and the power of stepping in for others. As she rounded the corner, she looked back one last time. Jake stood there, a lone figure against the incoming twilight. He had become a silent guardian for her that day, and his presence had shifted her understanding of the world. Life can often feel tumultuous, but sometimes it takes a moment of chaos to remind us that we all have the ability to choose courage. It begins with stepping forward like Jake did for her. As she walked down that old, familiar road, Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. This was just the beginning, an invitation to embrace every possibility that lay ahead. In a world where silence often prevails, she was ready to speak up, ready to be part of the change. With each step, she knew that no matter the battles that lie ahead, she wouldn't face them alone. There would always be a kindred spirit, even a silent cowboy, waiting on the sidelines when she needed it most. The street was bustling with life, the sounds of chatter and laughter weaving together like a vibrant tapestry. Sarah was lost in her thoughts, walking home after a long shift at the diner. She savored the familiar sights, the bright storefronts, the kids playing with bicycles, the sweet smell of fresh pastries wafting from a nearby cafe, but her peaceful afternoon was about to take a sharp turn. As she walked, she noticed a group of men standing on the corner, their laughter slicing through the air. One particularly loud man stood out, his voice booming like thunder. He was giving off an energy so overwhelming that it made her skin crawl. She told herself to keep walking, to ignore them, but the loud man's laughter echoed like a siren's call, pulling her attention away from her safe haven. "Hey," he shouted as she tried to pass by. Sarah felt her heart race. She wanted to just keep moving, but his eyes were fixed on her, locking her in place. "Just heading home," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. A simple answer, but the kind of tremor in her voice was enough to raise alarms within her. The man took a step closer, blocking her path. His tone shifted from playful to predatory, and her stomach dropped. She knew she had to break free to escape, but before she could act, he reached out and grabbed her arm tightly. Sarah shouted, trying to pull away, but his grip only tightened. Panic surged through her. Every instinct screamed at her to escape this situation. The laughter from his friends became distant, muffled by the rush of blood in her ears. In that moment of sheer fear, she felt completely isolated. For a split second, the noise around her quieted down. Her mind raced back to stories she had heard of women caught in similar situations, stories that ended in heartbreak or tragedy. Would she become another statistic today? Just then she caught sight of a man standing across the street, a cowboy dressed in worn denim and a hat that shadowed his eyes. While the world around her was filled with chaos, he stood silent, observing the scene unfold with a calm that felt almost surreal. Time seemed to freeze and a flicker of hope ignited within her. Would he step in? She shouted, this time louder. The cowboy remained still, leaning casually against the lamppost, but something in his demeanor spoke volumes. He didn't look away. Instead, it felt as if he was drawing strength from the moment, waiting and watching, assessing the situation with careful scrutiny. The loud man scoffed, glancing at the cowboy as if he just noticed him. "Yeah, I do," the cowboy replied, his voice low but filled with an unshakable confidence. There was something comforting about it, like a steady hand reaching into the chaos. "Mind your own business," the loud man shot back, though the bravado was tinged with uncertainty. "Let her go," the cowboy insisted, stepping forward, closing the distance between them. The atmosphere shifted as he entered the fray, and Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline. Would this courageous stranger stand up to the loud man? "Why don't you just mind your business, cowboy?" The loud man's voice faltered, but he didn't back down completely. "Maybe you should think carefully about what happens next," the cowboy warned, his eyes steady and piercing. Each word rang with authority. Sarah could feel the tension mounting, the air thickening around them. Those who stood nearby, once just bystanders, began turning their heads, their attention locked onto the unfolding drama. A light breeze whispered by, carrying a sense of anticipation that electrified the moment. The loud man hesitated. Sarah could almost see the gears turning in his mind as he weighed his options, a battle of bravado versus the quiet strength of the cowboy. He scoffed, but that familiarity with bravado slipped, replaced by a hint of fear surfacing beneath the surface. "Just walk away," the cowboy said softly, but there was a steeliness behind his words that lent them power. Something in that calm command seemed to shake the loud man's confidence. In that heart-stopping instant, vulnerability flashed across the loud man's face. He realized he might have underestimated both the strength he thought he had and the silent resolve standing before him. Sarah saw his grip loosen slightly, and not a moment too soon, she yanked her arm free, the rush of renewed agency flooding back into her. She shouted, her voice steady and empowered now. The loud man's bravado crumbled completely as he glared at them one last time. It was a defeated gesture, and he turned away, leaving behind both the cowboy's gaze and Sarah's firm resolve. As he stormed off, the air felt lighter, the shadows that had loomed over the street dissipating like early morning fog. Emotions surged within Sarah, a blend of relief, gratitude, and a visceral realization of her own strength. "Thank you," she said, turning to the cowboy. The cowboy smiled softly, tipping his hat slightly. "I couldn't just stand there." His calm demeanor centered her, even amidst the distress she had just faced. She asked, catching her breath, her heart still racing but now fueled by adrenaline and admiration. "Just a cowboy," he replied with a laid-back charm that made her smile. "Jake," she echoed, feeling a sense of warmth. It felt like the kind of name you could trust. "I've never had someone stand up for me like that." He shrugged lightly. "Not every day you see someone treat another person like that. It's important that we have each other's backs." For the first time that day, Sarah felt the stirring of hope. It felt like I was suffocating. "Fear can suffocate you," Jake said, his voice steady, "but it also reveals your strength. In that moment, you chose to fight back." They shared a sense of understanding, two souls connected through an unexpected encounter. As they stood side by side, the world around them seemed so much clearer, the chaos having settled into a breath of serenity. Sarah asked, intrigued by the calm presence that had entered her stormy day. "Sort of," he replied, glancing far into the distance as if reminiscing about miles traveled. "I go where the trail leads me. Maybe I need to find that trail for myself," she admitted, feeling a seed of adventure being planted in her heart. "Small towns can feel claustrophobic," Jake acknowledged. In that exchange of dreams and ideas, Sarah felt a deep connection, as if they were both kindred spirits chasing after something bigger than themselves. She realized her world had been painted with limitations, each brushstroke filled with doubts and fears. But with this conversation, the colors began to brighten, each word splashing vibrancy onto the once muted canvas. "I'll remember this day," Sarah said, her eyes shining. "I can't believe you just stepped in like that." "It's all part of being human," Jake replied simply. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting golden hues that wrapped around them like a warm blanket. The day was drawing to a close, but the warmth lingered as they continued to talk, their laughter punctuating the air. But as the sun sank further and shadows stretched longer, Sarah felt the weight of reality settling back in. "I should probably get going," she said reluctantly, knowing she had to return to her world, the noise that waited at the diner's doorstep. "All right then," Jake said, a hint of understanding in his eyes. "Just remember, you're stronger than you think." She nodded, feeling a spark within her, a kindling of strength igniting her spirit. "You've really inspired me today, Jake." "Glad to hear it," he replied, tipping his hat one last time. "And don't hesitate to call on your own strength." With one last smile exchanged between them, Sarah turned and took a step back towards her routine, a weight lifted from her shoulders. The encounter lingered in her mind, a seed of courage planted firmly in her heart. As she walked further away, she glanced back one last time. Jake stood there, a steadfast presence against the backdrop of the fading light. He would remain a quiet symbol of resistance against the chaos of life. She would carry that piece of him in her heart as she faced her own battles. The world feels big and overwhelming sometimes, but in moments of darkness, there are those who dare to shine. And as Sarah stepped into the warm embrace of twilight, she felt empowered, equipped to take on whatever lay ahead. Her journey wouldn't be without challenge, but she now knew she didn't have to face it alone. That bond they shared in a fleeting moment would echo through her life, a reminder that the power of stepping in for another can change someone's entire path. With each step forward, she felt her strength grow, ready to embrace the adventures waiting just out of sight. The cowboy's silent strength had become her voice, lighting the way for her to speak up for herself, and perhaps one day, for someone else in need. The laughter of the crowd faded into a tense silence as Sarah walked down the busy street, her heart racing at the disturbing encounter just moments before. She had just wrapped up her shift at the diner, a long day of serving late lunchers and coffee-sipping regulars. The golden glow of the sun cast a warm light over everything, making it feel like any other ordinary day. But just as she was about to cross the street, a sudden jolt pulled her back to reality. The voice rang out like a thunderclap, loud and aggressive. Sarah froze as she turned to confront the man who spoke. He stood there, the kind of man whose presence was far too large for the space around him, with wild hair and an attitude that screamed trouble. "Just passing through," she replied, trying to sound calm and detached, even as her stomach twisted in knots. She picked up her pace, but he had other ideas. He stepped directly into her path, blocking her way like a wall. "Not so fast," he laughed, his friends chuckling behind him like hyenas, feeding off his bravado. Then before she could react, he lunged forward and grabbed her arm. The grip was tight and unyielding, sparking a rush of panic that coursed through her like ice water. She shouted, her voice a mixture of fear and anger, but her pleas only encouraged him. He leaned in closer, invading her personal space, taunting her like she was some sort of plaything. "What's the matter?" He taunted, his breath heavy and foul against her skin. Her heart raced, fear threatening to swallow her whole. Hormones surged, adrenaline kicked in, and she felt the familiar rush of terror blooming inside her like a bad dream with no end in sight. Around her, people walked by, some glancing their way but quickly looking away. Fear can paralyze bystanders, making them hesitant to intervene in what feels like someone else's fight. It's a cold truth of human nature, many will choose indifference over involvement. Feeling trapped, Sarah's eyes darted from the man to his friends, hoping they would step in. But they just stood there, feasting on the spectacle, treating her like some kind of entertainment. Just when she thought all hope was lost, she noticed a figure across the street. A cowboy, tall and lean, wearing a weathered hat and an air of quiet confidence. He leaned casually against a lamppost, arms folded, watching the scene unfold with a stone-cold demeanor. For the first time since the encounter began, a glimmer of hope flickered inside her. Would he step in? Would he help her? The loud man shouted at the cowboy, flinching slightly as he realized he was no longer the center of attention. Without flinching, the cowboy pushed off the lamppost and took a few deliberate steps forward. "I think you need to let her go," he said, his voice steady and calm, as if he were speaking to a child instead of a raging bull. The loud man turned, aggression boiling in his eyes. "You want to back off, cowboy?" "Maybe so," the cowboy replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. The tension in the air grew heavy. Sarah's heart raced, not only from fear but from a deep-seated need for courage. The world had suddenly shrunk to this standoff, with the loud man's bravado faltering in the face of the cowboy's calm assurance. The loud man shouted back, but his voice was shaky, filled with uncertainty. The cowboy did not react to the threat, he simply stood there, eyes locked on the loud man. "Your choice here is simple," the cowboy said, a steady calmness in his voice. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat, the fear of the moment entwining with a spark of hope. Could this stranger really stand up to him? The loud man glanced at his friends, who seemed less enthusiastic now, the laughter fading from their faces. They were just boys playing at being men, and deep down they understood the implications of crossing paths with someone who exuded strength without saying a word. He growled, turning back to the cowboy, frustration bubbling on the surface. "It's not about being scared," the cowboy replied, his tone dipping deeper, imbued with a quiet authority that felt almost tangible. "It's about knowing right from wrong." In that moment, Sarah saw the loud man's confidence begin to crack. The bravado she had witnessed earlier was nothing more than a facade, a protective shield that was starting to crumble under the weight of reality. She wished she could speak, wished she could demand he let her go, but fear clamped down on her tongue like a cruel prison. The loud man scanned the scene, searching for an escape, before finally releasing her arm, letting her slip free from his grip. He growled as he turned to walk away, anger still clawing at the edges of his voice. Sarah took a step back, her body trembling as adrenaline flooded through her veins. She couldn't believe it, she was free. She turned to the cowboy, who had stepped in just when she felt trapped and powerless. "Thank you," she breathed, her voice shaking. He offered a small smile, a hint of warmth shining through his rugged exterior. No one deserves to be treated that way. I thought I was going to be in trouble, she admitted, glancing back to where the loud man had disappeared, the echoes of that situation receding into the distance. It's easy to feel helpless in a situation like that, the cowboy responded, his voice low and steady. Many people would have walked away, but you held your ground. Something inside her swelled at his praise. She thought of all the times she had seen someone mistreated or bullied and felt too afraid to do anything. She asked, curiosity bubbling within her. I've seen too many people suffer in silence, he replied, his gaze thoughtful. Sometimes you must break the silence. His words resonated deeply. The weight of fear had lifted, but the moment had served as a reminder. The world was not just filled with loud voices. There were silent warriors, too, ready to speak out when it mattered most. I'm Sarah, she said, taking a step closer, now feeling the familiar surge of warmth and connection growing between them. Jake, he replied, tipping his hat slightly, an easy grin playing on his lips. It's rare to meet someone like you, she remarked, still trying to absorb the experience. We all have that power, Jake replied softly, looking into her eyes. You just didn't know it yet. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting it in shades of orange and pink, Sarah felt a surge of new energy. She had come so close to being overwhelmed by fear, but here was this man, reminding her of her strength, a reminder that compassion still existed in the world. She asked, wanting to learn more about this quiet force of nature standing before her. I'm a cowboy, he said simply, a spark of pride in his voice. It's a life that keeps me on the move. The moment felt beautiful, almost surreal. The rush of adrenaline had faded, but the exchange of words brought warmth to her heart. Maybe I need to carve out my own path, she said, contemplating her own life that felt so stagnant at times. I get that, he replied, nodding in understanding. She thought about it, imagining the vast world beyond her small town, mountains, rivers, endless skies. I want to see more of that, she confessed, the idea igniting something deep within her. The connection between them deepened as they shared hopes, dreams, and fears, each word building a bridge that pulled them closer together. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows, but they found warmth in each other's presence. But eventually, reality crept back in as the day began to fade. I should probably head back, she said reluctantly. The diner wouldn't wait forever, but the moment felt too precious to let go. Of course, Jake said, understanding etched on his face. Just remember what you have inside you. His reassurance sent a wave of determination through her. I won't forget today, she said earnestly. As she turned to walk away, she cast one last glance back at him. There he stood, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the evening sky, a silent guardian who had stepped in just when she needed it most. The encounter was both fleeting and profound, leaving an imprint on her heart that would last far longer than a moment. As she made her way home, she felt the warmth of his words wrapping around her like a protective cloak. She would carry this experience with her, a newfound courage ignited in the wake of that encounter. No longer would she shrink back in fear. Instead, she would embrace the strength within, ready to stand up for herself and perhaps for others facing their own battles. In a world filled with noise, she would remember that silence could be just as powerful, and every now and then a gentle reminder might come in the form of a silent cowboy, leading the way to self-discovery amid the noise. The journey ahead was filled with possibilities, and Sarah was ready to embrace every moment, her heart open to the unknown. The streets of the small town buzzed with the rhythm of the afternoon. Sarah weaved her way through the crowd, her mind still buzzing from the long shift at the diner. The air was thick with the sweet scent of fresh pastries from the bakery down the street, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee that lingered in her clothes. Felt like any other day, sunshine pouring down over everything, illuminating the laughter and life that surrounded her. And yet something was about to shatter that bubble of safety. As she turned the corner, she noticed a group of raucous men standing outside a bar, their laughter erupting like fireworks. One man stood out, his voice loud and abrasive, reverberating across the sidewalk. Hey, his gaze locked onto her as if she had become his target. Instinctively, Sarah's heart began to race. She felt a creeping sense of unease skitter through her as he approached. Just walking home, she replied, trying to remain calm, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. Without warning, he lunged forward, grabbing her arm with a grip like iron. Don't be in such a rush. His friends laughed behind him, egging him on like a pack of wolves. Sarah shouted, panic flooding her veins. She tugged against his grip, but he held fast, tugging her closer. World around her began to dim, the laughter fading into the background as her focus narrowed onto the man in front of her. In that moment, her body flooded with memory stories of women who had faced worse, outcomes that had turned catastrophic in an instant. She cried out, desperation creeping into her voice. People passed by, heads turning for a moment but swiftly looking away, unwilling to intervene. The silence of bystanders can feel like a weight pressing down when you need help the most. Just then, out of the periphery of her vision, she noticed a man standing across the street. He was a cowboy, tall and casual, leaning against a lamppost. His hat was tilted low, obscuring his eyes, but there was an air of quiet strength about him. He didn't join in the frenzy. Instead, he merely observed like a steady anchor in a storm. The loud man shouted, eyeing the cowboy suspiciously. "Just someone who doesn't like what he sees," the cowboy replied, his voice carrying across the street like a clear, sharp bell tolling in the chaos. The loud man sneered, but his bravado faltered just a touch. There was something in the cowboy's demeanor that made the tension in the air shift. "Let her go," the cowboy said, stepping forward. The stillness of his presence contrasted sharply with the loud man's frantic energy, and for a brief moment the world held its breath. The loud man barked, maintaining a facade of bravado, but beneath it, doubt flickered like a candle flame. The cowboy didn't flinch. His tone was calm, steady, a lighthouse guiding her through the storm. "You're expecting her to laugh along with your little game, but that isn't what's happening right now." A moment Sarah felt herself pushing back against panic and fear, the tension in her arm loosening slightly as hope surged within her. Here was someone standing up when it mattered most. The loud man hesitated, glancing back at his friends, confusion etching lines on his forehead. He stepped closer, his hold on Sarah's arm tightening again, but her energy had shifted. She shouted again, this time with more conviction. "Walk away and this will be over," the cowboy insisted, his voice steady. The loud man's bravado began to crumble, the weight of the attention making him fidgety. Tension crackled in the air like electricity. In what felt like an eternity, the loud man finally released her arm, releasing her like she was a hot potato. He spat before turning on his heel and storming away. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah could hardly believe it. She was free. The adrenaline coursed through her veins like fire. She turned to the cowboy, who stood calmly observing the aftermath in silence. "Thank you," she managed, breathless, a feeling of relief sweeping over her. He tipped his hat slightly, a nod of respect. No one should have to face that kind of treatment. His eyes held a depth that made her feel understood. "I felt helpless," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "It's easy to feel that way," he replied, "but you did have a choice to fight back." They shared a moment of connection, a silent understanding mingling in the aftermath of chaos. "I'm Sarah," she said, taking a step closer. "Jake," he replied simply, his voice smooth like whiskey, warm and inviting. "I'm just passing through, but it's good to see someone stand up for themselves." "Most people wouldn't have stepped in," she remarked, glancing back at the retreating figure of the loud man. "But sometimes it takes one person to remind another that they're not alone," he said, interrupting her gently. As they stood there, illuminated by the fading sunlight, the air felt lighter, as if the remnants of tension were whisking away in the breeze. Talking to Jake began to feel like a balm for her rattled spirit. The chaos had shifted into something softer, a moment fueled by understanding and shared resilience. She asked, intrigued by the quiet strength he emanated. "I'm a cowboy," he replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "A real cowboy," she echoed, feeling charmed. "It has its ups and downs," Jake said, contemplating as though summoning memories from countless trails ridden, "but it keeps me grounded." Sarah nodded, feeling the tug of adventure whispering in her heart. "Maybe I need to find that openness too." "Small towns can feel suffocating," Jake said, understanding shining in his eyes. With each shared word, a new lightness began to surface for Sarah. She realized her fears, while potent, had overshadowed her own strength for too long. For every moment of darkness, she could summon a light, and in that moment, standing with Jake, she felt herself awakening to that possibility. "I think I want to break out of the routine," Sarah said, a spark igniting within her. "Change can be scary, but it's often where growth happens," Jake said, nodding approvingly. "No one can truly know their strength until it's tested." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Sarah felt renewed. The connection shared with Jake felt genuine and profound. Once she had felt so small, now she was beginning to feel the stirrings of something greater inside her, an ember of courage wanting to burst into flames. "I don't think I'll ever forget this day," she said, feeling the warmth of gratitude swell in her chest. "Thank you for stepping up." "Glad to hear it," he replied with a smirk. "But don't give me all the credit." Sarah's heart fluttered at that acknowledgement. Maybe she was capable of standing tall, even in the face of fear. Maybe she could join Jake in confronting the chaos of the world. But as night began to fall, Sarah felt a tinge of reluctance to leave that moment behind. It felt too precious, like gold dust glittering in the fading light. "I should probably head back," she said, glancing toward the fading glow of the diner sign in the distance. "All right," Jake said, his eyes locking with hers, a shared promise hanging in the air. "Remember your strength." Taking a step back, Sarah felt an odd sense of finality, yet also renewal. "I won't forget today," she replied with sincerity, feeling empowered by his words. As she turned to walk away, she glanced back one last time. Jake stood there, a lone figure against the night sky, silhouetted like a knight guarding a forgotten world. This unexpected encounter had shifted something fundamental within her. With each step, the chaos of the earlier moment faded, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. Sarah felt lighter as she moved, as if the earlier encounter had washed away years of self-doubt. The streets around her buzzed with life, but she no longer felt overwhelmed by it. Instead, she felt like she belonged in this world, ready to carve out her own path. The The courage that had erupted in the face of turmoil now rooted itself in her heart. No longer would she shrink back in fear nor allow others to define her. As she looked up at the stars that began to sprinkle the sky, Sarah knew that she could embrace her strength and face whatever challenges lay ahead. And though she walked away from Jake, that moment with the silent cowboy would travel with her, a memory etched in the core of her being, a silent reminder that sometimes, when facing the loudest storms, it takes a calm, steady presence to lead the way forward. With each step, she felt ready to confront the world, stronger than before and open to all the possibilities that awaited her on that endless journey ahead. The street was bustling, filled with the sounds of laughter and chatter. Sunlight spilled across the pavement, illuminating the faces of cheerful passersby. Sarah navigated through the crowd, her heart still pounding from a long shift at the diner. Just as she was about to cross the street, it happened. "Hey there," the voice roared like an angry storm, shattering the peace of the afternoon. Sarah turned to face him, her heart racing. The man stood there, towering and brash, like a predator sizing up its prey. His eyes gleamed with a mix of mischief and menace, and she felt a chill run down her spine. "Just heading home," she replied, attempting to keep her voice steady, but fear crept in, making her sound smaller than she wanted to be. She tried to sidestep him, but he blocked her path, taking a step closer, invading her personal space. "Don't be in such a rush," he sneered, a cocky smirk spreading across his face. His friends laughed behind him, egging him on like wolves in a hunt. Then, without warning, he reached out, grabbing her arm with a grip so tight it felt like a vice. Panic surged through her, pushing her heart to race faster. She shouted, pain and anger mixing in her voice as she pulled against his hold. He laughed, his breath foul and aggressive. The laughter of his friends filled her ears, a cruel reminder of how alone she felt in that moment. The world around her seemed to fade into a blur, people walking by, the sounds of the city all drowned out by a ringing silence filled with her fear. She cried, but it felt futile. Bystanders glanced her way, their eyes wide with shock, but quickly returned to their own lives, too paralyzed by fear or indifference to intervene. It's a psychological truth, bystanders rarely act. The fear of involvement often keeps people at a distance, unwilling to step into the chaos. Just then she noticed a figure across the street, a cowboy leaning casually against a lamppost. He was calm, arms crossed, his hat shading his eyes. While the world around her felt frantic, he possessed a steady confidence that made her heart leap with a hint of hope. Would he step in? The loud man shouted, breaking from his arrogance to look at the cowboy. The cowboy took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. The loud man scoffed, but something about the cowboy's demeanor commanded respect. He sneered, but doubt twisted his bravado. "I think you need to realize you're losing," the cowboy replied, his tone low and steady. There was no bravado in his voice, just a pure, unyielding calm that cut through the tension. Sarah felt the grip on her arm loosen slightly as the loud man hesitated. Was this really happening? Could this stranger really help her? The loud man shouted, but the edge of uncertainty crept into his words. "Maybe not," the cowboy replied, stepping closer, "but you obviously don't know her either." With those words, Sarah felt a surge of empowerment. The loud man was no longer just a monster pulling her down. He was now a coward facing the strength of another. She tugged at her arm again, and this time the loud man's grip fell away completely. She shouted, her voice stronger now, fueled by the cowboy's presence. The fight within her ignited, replacing fear with determination. The loud man blinked in surprise, his bravado slipping away, leaving nothing but anger. With a rage-filled glance at the cowboy, he turned and stormed off, muttering threats under his breath. Sarah's heart raced, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over her. "Thank you," she breathed, turning to the cowboy. The words spilled out raw and sincere. He tipped his hat slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. "You did the hard part, standing your ground." "I thought I was done for," she admitted, trying to steady her shaking breath. The adrenaline was still coursing through her, but now it felt like electricity, tingling through her veins rather than weighing her down. The cowboy's eyes held a steady gaze, as if he could see right through her. Something about those words resonated with Sarah. Suddenly, she was no longer just the victim in this story. She had taken a stand. She asked, wanting to know more about this silent guardian who had stepped in just when it counted. "Jake," he replied, his voice smooth, like a river flowing effortlessly. "Most people wouldn't have stepped in," she said, glancing down the street where the loud man had disappeared. "No," he said simply. "Sometimes standing up is more important than being afraid." As she stood there, the tension from moments ago began to dissipate, replaced by a warm stirring in her heart. There was something magnetic about Jake, something that made her want to learn more. She asked, intrigued. He looked thoughtful for a moment. "I've seen too many people suffer in silence," he said, looking across the street as if he was recalling memories. In that moment, Sarah felt an awakening within her. She thought of how often she had been afraid to stand up, not just for herself, but for others too. "You're right," she whispered. Jake nodded, his expression gentle but firm. Fear is a tricky thing. It can make us feel small, even powerless. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows on the pavement. The air was filled with a sense of both urgency and calm, an interesting mix that echoed in the depths of their conversation. She asked, curious about the life of this man who had shown such quiet courage. "Whenever the trail leads me," he replied with a small smile. For the first time, Sarah felt a flicker of adventure ignite inside her. "This town feels small sometimes," she admitted. "There is," Jake said, leaning in slightly as if to instill confidence. "Every open road holds stories waiting to be written." His words hung in the air, resonating deeply. She realized she had always seen herself as a small part of a larger puzzle, but perhaps that small part could still hold immense value. Just as she had found strength in herself, she could shape her own narrative one step at a time. "I want to explore that," she said, excitement bubbling within her like a pot about to boil over. "This experience has shown me that I can face my fears." Jake's expression brightened. "That's the spirit." They exchanged smiles, a bond formed through shared adversity and newfound understanding. Each moment spent with him felt like peeling back layers of could into could. "I'll remember this day," Sarah said, feeling the weight of gratitude draping over her shoulders like a comforting blanket. "Thank you, just paying it forward," Jake replied. As dusk approached, Sarah glanced back at the street where moments ago, fear had consumed her. "I should probably head back," she said, a hint of reluctance in her voice. "Of course," Jake said, nodding in understanding, "and keep that fire inside you." Taking a step back, Sarah felt an odd sense of loss even as she felt empowered. "I won't forget," she assured him, a swirl of emotions blooming in her chest. As she turned to leave, she glanced back one last time. Jake stood there, a solitary figure against the backdrop of a deepening navy sky. In that moment, Sarah knew she was no longer just a flicker of light in a vast darkness. She had ignited a flame that would guide her forward. Each step she took was filled with a newfound purpose. She felt lighter, ready to write her own stories, to push through the constraints that had held her back for too long. Jake's unwavering presence had reminded her that strength can arise in the unlikeliest of moments. The streets around her buzzed with life, and Sarah reveled in that energy, feeling an undeniable sense of belonging. She held tightly to the memory of Jake, carrying his quiet strength with her as she stepped boldly into her future. In a world filled with shadows, she had met a silent guardian who had helped her unlock the courage hidden deep within. And with each passing day, she would remember that sometimes it takes a calm presence to help navigate the storm. The journey ahead would be filled with adventures, but now she was ready to embrace every moment, every challenge, and every opportunity that awaited her. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows on the sidewalk where Sarah hurried along, her mind preoccupied with the thoughts of her day. She had just finished her shift at the diner, a blur of coffee refills and friendly smiles. The warm air wrapped around her, but beneath the surface, a sense of unease began to creep in. As she approached a corner, she noticed a group of men loitering outside a bar, their laughter ringing out like an alarm bell. One man in particular, loud and boisterous, seemed to take immediate notice of her. His voice boomed, dripping with a confidence that sent a shiver down her spine. Sarah's stomach dropped. She tried to ignore him, quickening her pace, but he stepped into her path, blocking her way like a wall. "Just trying to get home," she said, attempting to sound casual, though her heart raced in her chest. "Not so fast," he said with a smirk, reaching out and grabbing her arm tightly. The grip was unyielding and panic surged through her veins. She tugged at her arm, but he held on, leaning in closer, his breath hot against her skin. He taunted, a twisted smile stretching across his face. Laughter erupted from his friends, thinking it all a joke, but for Sarah it felt like a nightmare unfolding. Time slowed as she fought to catch her breath. The world around her dimmed, the bustling street fading into the background. All she could hear was her heartbeat drumming in her ears and the laughter of those men cold and cruel. She yelled, desperation clawing her throat. People passed by, casting quick glances but then turning away, unwilling to step in. It's a terrifying truth that many people often hesitate to intervene in situations like this, feeling paralyzed by fear or uncertainty. Just then she caught sight of a figure across the street. A cowboy, tall and confident, leaned against a lamppost, arms crossed. He wore a weathered hat that shielded his eyes from the sun. There was an air of quiet strength about him, an unshakable calm that starkly contrasted the chaos unfolding before her. She felt a flicker of hope ignite inside her. "Would he step in?" the loud man shouted, suddenly noticing the cowboy. The cowboy pushed off the lamppost, striding toward them with purpose. His voice was deep and steady, slicing through the tension in the air like a knife. The loud man's bravado faltered for a moment, uncertainty flashing in his eyes. He barked, but there was a tremor in his voice now, a crack in his facade. The cowboy didn't flinch. He took a few more steps closer. "It is my business when you're making someone feel unsafe." For a brief moment, Sarah felt her heart expand with a rush of gratitude and hope. The cowboy was standing up for her, becoming a beacon of strength just when she needed it most. She shouted, her voice gaining power she didn't know she possessed. The loud man hesitated, glancing back at his friends who were suddenly less enthusiastic about the spectacle. He challenged, his confidence wavering as he looked at the cowboy. "Maybe you just need to walk away," the cowboy said, his tone unwavering, calm as a summer breeze. The loud man's grip on her arm loosened for a split second, and Sarah seized the opportunity. She tugged her arm free fully, stepping back to stand beside the cowboy. A surge of adrenaline coursed through her, igniting her spirit. She shouted at the man, her voice tinged with newfound strength. With a last glare at the cowboy, the loud man turned and stormed off, his friends trailing behind, their laughter quickly fading into the distance. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she watched him leave, disbelief washing over her. The cowboy asked gently, turning to her with a concerned look. I think so, Sarah replied, her words trembling. Relief poured over her like rain after a drought. Thank you for stepping in. I couldn't just stand by and watch, he replied, his tone steady, filled with a quiet strength that calmed her racing heart. Sarah looked into his eyes, seeking reassurance. I really thought I was going to. Fear has a way of convincing us that we're completely alone, a truth many people have faced, but in that moment she realized she had found an ally. But you showed him, you took a stand, he said, and there was warmth in his voice that made her feel seen. She asked, curiosity bubbling up. Jake, he said with a small smile. Yeah, she said, feeling a connection spark between them. He chuckled slightly, not just a cowboy, I try to be a good man too. As they stood there, the world around them began to wake up again, the noise of the street flowing back into her ears. But the earlier chaos felt distant now, a new calm had settled in her heart. She asked, hoping to learn more about this quiet man who had intervened just in time. Whenever I can, he replied, the open road. She admired him, feeling a combination of gratitude and intrigue. I've always wanted to explore beyond this town, but I felt stuck. The world is bigger than you think, Jake said thoughtfully. It's easy to feel boxed in. Their conversation continued to flow, each exchange building a bond between them. Sarah felt the last remnants of fear fade away as excitement began to blossom. Maybe it's time for me to break free, she said. Sounds like a good plan, he encouraged, leaning closer. Face the unknown with courage. The setting sun began to paint the sky in a kaleidoscope of colors, casting a warm glow over them. In that moment, standing beside this silent cowboy, Sarah felt like she could take on the world. The earlier encounter had ignited something within her, a spark that challenged her to become more. But as the night approached and the stars began to twinkle, doubt began to creep back in. She whispered, vulnerability creeping into her voice. Jake tilted his head, looking deep into her eyes. What if you can? It's crucial to face the what-ifs that scare you. Those words sank in, and Sarah felt a wave of determination wash over her. She wouldn't let fear dictate her life any longer. You're right. Just then, a sudden commotion echoed down the street. A group of people rushed past them, shouting. Sarah's heart raced again, anxiety clawing at her throat. She asked, I don't know, Jake replied, scanning the street. They moved closer to the sound, the crowd growing thicker as they approached a gathering near the parking lot. Everyone leaned forward, eager to see. Sarah felt a twinge of nervousness, but also the thrill that came with facing the unknown. As they pushed through the crowd, they spotted two men facing off, caught in a tense confrontation. The loudest one, maybe the same one who had grabbed her earlier, was yelling, red-faced with anger. You think you can just take what's mine? Before she could process the situation, tension hung thick in the air, and then with a sudden movement, the situation escalated. The loud man swung his fist, and chaos erupted. Sarah gasped, instinctively grabbing his arm as adrenaline surged. I've got this, he said quietly, and there was a calmness in his eyes that steadied her as he stepped forward. She watched as he approached the confrontation, every muscle in her body tightening. Would he step in again? Just as the loud man prepared to throw another punch, Jake raised his hand, voice firm yet composed. All eyes turned toward him, and for a second, time froze. The loud man paused, surprise flickering across his face. Without hesitation, Jake responded, You don't want to do this. But the loud man laughed, his eyes wild. You think you can stop me? The crowd shifted uneasily, whispers circulating as tension built again. Sarah felt her heart in her throat. Jake stood firm, unmoved. Maybe not, but I know enough to recognize when someone's about to ruin their own life. The boldness in Jake's voice sent ripples through the crowd. Some people began murmuring words of agreement, but the loud man's bravado swelled, his face twisted with rage. He barked at Jake, fists clenched, eyes darting around, seeking validation from his friends who just watched. Just then, out of nowhere, one of his friends stepped in. Hey man, maybe you should cool it, he muttered, clearly uncomfortable with the situation unfolding. For a second, everything felt suspended in time. Sarah held her breath, eyes flicking between Jake and the loud man. Would it end in a brawl? The tension buzzed thick in the air, and she squeezed Jake's arm without thinking. The loud man shouted, voice dripping with disdain. You think you're a hero? But Jake didn't blink. I'm not trying to be a hero. Something shifted in the loud man's expression. Doubt began to spill into anger, causing him to hesitate. The crowd grew still, waiting for what would happen next, and then just as it seemed something would break, the ground shook beneath them. There was a loud crash like thunder striking right at their feet. Sarah looked around in panic, realizing a truck had lost control, skidding into the parking lot. Instantly, screams erupted as people scattered in all directions, confusion blending into chaos. The loud man's bravado vanished, replaced by the raw instinct to flee. Sarah yelled, fear flooding her heart. He called back, solid and steady even as the world around them spun out of control. Just as the crowd surged, Jake grabbed Sarah's hand, guiding her through the chaos. She felt his grip tighten, anchoring her to him as they navigated through the throng of panic-stricken people. He shouted, leading her towards safety. But as they moved, the loud man reappeared, panic in his eyes. He bore down on them, fueled by desperation. He yelled, shoving past people like a crazed bull. Sarah felt her heart drop. The fear she had just begun to shed came rushing back. Jake stood between her and the loud man, but the wild energy in the air made her heart race. Would he confront Jake again amid the chaos? Would the confrontation escalate once more? And as the dust began to settle and the world felt like it was spinning faster than she could keep up with, everything hinged on that very moment. Would Jake's calm demeanor triumph, or would the noise drown out their resolve? In that split second, everything could change, and as she stood there hand in hand with the silent cowboy, she realized the stakes were high. The world around her felt raw and uncertain again, the echoes of danger looming larger than before. Would she have the courage to meet it head-on? The danger was tangible, and it all came crashing down in that instant.